What's going on, everybody? Now, the other day, I was talking to all of you, and one of the things that I said was listening to former collectors, experts, people who have experienced life have a lot of wisdom. And a lot of their wisdom is based on their experience, their trial and error. And when they're willing to pass on that wisdom to us, I think we should probably listen. Now, there are a lot of collectors that have been around this hobby for a long time, and they didn't take breaks like a lot of us. They just went straight through and have been in it for decades. And I wanted to focus on a couple of people in the industry that I think kind of were visionaries as far as recognizing future value before the value really came to fruition. Now, there are other collectors. There are other big name people that have been in and out of the hobby. And you may be a big fan of the couple of people that I'm going to talk about today, or you might not. But I'm not going to just talk about them. I'm going to show you some clips from interviews that these two have done to share their wisdom and to point on some specific things that I think would benefit each of us to hear from them themselves. Now, the first person I want to talk about is Mr. Mint, Al Rosen. Now, Al Rosen is a name that has been in the news as much as any collector slash dealer that's been out there. And you probably recognize the name. I personally met Mr. Mint 2 or 3 times. I personally walked up to his table multiple times. Now, when I think of Mr. Mint and my experience with him, he always had the first table in the show. You walk in, and before you could really even enter the show, you had to go by Mr. Mint's table. And in the cases, he would have $100 bills just fanned out with a sign that said, "I'm buying." Occasionally, he might have a couple of cards with him, but I don't remember more than a handful of cards in his cases. And the cards that he had were massive cards that were really designed to say, this is the type of stuff that I buy. Big time cards. Now, some people have a variety of opinions about Mr. Mint. Mr. Mint would even say himself he realizes that, he may be a little obnoxious and over the top.
I don't sell anything at the show, so I'm there to buy, and I like to be noticed. As a matter of fact, I become so obnoxious that I don't do a show unless I have the front table. Not everyone likes my act.
Because this is not a very impressive looking ring.
But the hell with those people.
They're worth $10 a piece. So I do know what I'm talking about.
The hunt, the chase, the pirate hunt. You couldn't have me do anything except do that.
So yes, is Mr. Mint a person who is boisterous? For sure. Is he somebody who's larger than life? 100%. But he also was able to recognize some things about future values in cards that a lot of other people overlooked or maybe missed. So hearing his words from him, I think, is important. What I'm going to do is show you a few clips from some interviews that he did. One of the interviews in particular that Mr. Mint did is posted on YouTube. The full-length thing, there's 4 or 5 parts to it. All combined, it's like bordering on a couple of hours. I've watched them multiple times, and what I did is decided to pull a few clips in particular that I thought would be interesting for us to watch, and then I was going to stop a few times and comment on what it is that he has to say and why I found it to be particularly interesting. Now, the other person that I decided to feature here is a name that's been in the news more recently and is more recognizable for current collectors and have maybe even seen a different, opportunities, and that's Marshall Fogel. Marshall Fogel is widely considered to be in possession of the best collection in the world. Now, some people might disagree with it. Some people might agree with it. But regardless of your thoughts of Marshall Fogel, he has an incredible collection. And his collection is not just cards. Marshall Fogel's collection is largely cards. In fact, my dad even sold Marshall Fogel 40 or 50 cards out of his collection when he was liquidating a couple of his sets. But Marshall Fogel is a guy who was able to recognize early on that some of the memorabilia out there might have a lot of potential, not just cards. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a few looks at a few clips of what Marshall Fogel has to say. Now, Geoff Wilson, we know him as Sports Card Investor as his channel. He also has a podcast where he does lots of interviews. And he's interviewed on his channel Marshall Fogel several times. And honestly, genuinely, I think Geoff Wilson does a really good job with his podcast and his interviews. He gets great guests. He asks really good questions. And the things that I hear on there are things that I genuinely look forward to hearing from his channel. So we're going to take a look at some of the things that Marshall Fogel has shared on Geoff Wilson's channel that I think are important for all of us to hear. First, however, let's take a look at Mr. Mint explaining how he got into the hobby of collecting and of sports cards. Let's take a look at what he had to say about how he got involved.
You've been doing it a long time, man. What got you into this thing?
I went to a baseball card convention in 1976, and as you know, you have cards here in our own holders, and I went to this show, and it was cards, but no on round tables.
Okay.
But no cards and holders. They were just laying there, thrown on a table.
On round tables.
On round tables.
This was back in '76.
With no covering on the table, just laying there.
Is that right?
And mantle table was $3. So I wiped it out. I took every mantle.
Any Mickey mantle.
Not because they're worth money. That was my childhood. That's why people buy this stuff.
You were a big mantle guy.
Because they recapture a piece of their youth.
Sure.
By buying mantles. So I bought all the mantles, and then I collected all the show. Well, there weren't many shows.
So you weren't really a dealer at that point.
No,
it was
a collector.
Hobby.
And I went around. Then I refined my search to only near mint to mint. That's how I got my nickname. And I started as a collector. I started piecing sets and building sets together.
All right. So that's how Mr. Mint got into the hobby. And the thing about Mr. Mint is we all think of him as like a flipper. And to a large extent, he was. He was a dealer. He was a buyer of massive vintage collections and then seller of those collections for profit. And a lot of what he was able to do was actually find some of these collections and buy them and then piece it out. But the thing that a lot of us might think about Mr. Mint is that he was just a dealer and just a flipper, but he was a collector as well. Now, I realize that this interview is, it's older, so the quality isn't great, but it still provides us with information from the source himself. Instead of somebody like myself just simply talking about Mr. Mint, we can hear his words. Now, the other thing that people forget, though, is he was a collector as well. Here's a question that he answered during the interview about his collection and about his favorite card in the collection. So let's check that out.
My favorite card is a 1953 Topps Mickey Mantle.
That is a beautiful card. That is.
You have it graded?
I have it graded. I have a 7. I can't afford, unlike Doc and the Pirate, I can't afford to buy 8s and 9s.
PSA or BGS?
No, PSA.
Now, a lot of people, when they think of Mr. Mint, they think of, this guy offered very little money for collections that were worth a fortune, and then he got rich off of them, and he didn't care about the hobby itself. He didn't care about actually collecting. He just cared about values, which, to be honest with you, from what I've read, from, my interactions, it kind of seemed like that was the case. But then he said this, which I thought was super interesting, that the hobby is more than just values. Check out what he said here.
Now, most kids nowadays that collect this stuff, they look in the book, they look in the Beckett to see how much it's worth, and I think that's wrong.
I agree with you. I tell the people, collect what you like.
I mean, it's nice to pull a Mantle signature or a Mantle, 1 of 20, whatever you were pulling, 1 out of 29, or, those, and they're nice, but to look them up in a book and say, oh, I have a $40 card, that's not to me enjoying it. The enjoyment to me is looking on the back, looking at the stats you guys are doing.
I found that very interesting. I found it interesting that Mr. Mint was kind of complaining about how young kids are so obsessed with the values of the cards instead of the hobby itself. Now, I want to take a look here at something that Marshall Fogel had to say, but a very similar theme of what Mr. Mint had to say. We all go back and forth of, should I do high grade condition, or should I do cool cards in lower grade that I can afford? Now, again, these are just opinions and there is no right or wrong answer, but let's take a look at what they had to say when talking about condition and quality of cards when purchasing cards or pieces to add to their collection and to their portfolio.
I've always been a person who was always wanted everything neat and tidy and simple, and even when I had toys, I always took care of them. In comic books, for some reason, I had the instinct to want to have everything in order, and I think that's important, is to have structure in collecting, and to be a person of great detail, and to be orderly and think a lot about what you're doing. So the background of my collecting is A, educate yourself. B, rely on yourself. Read about it, learn about it, enjoy it. Don't depend on the auction houses for anything. Get a mentor that's a collector. Collect horizontally, don't collect vertically. And what I mean by that is, if you collect Brooklyn Dodgers, there's a point where if you keep drilling down, you're going to get a bunch of stuff nobody cares about. You want to figure out, who do I want to collect? Do I want to collect Colfax, Greenberg, Matheson, whatever? What subjects do you want to collect? I decided to collect horizontally. I wanted to collect the history. And I also wanted to collect the condition is everything. I don't really care if Babe Ruth signed a photo of him with a called shot and it looks like a fifth-wheeler truck ran over it. I'm not buying that. Now, that doesn't mean somebody else couldn't buy it because they can afford it. But I think condition is everything. Also, look at what are you buying? What's the story behind what you're buying? And so that's generally the way I look at it. I think the main thing I can tell the viewers of this, of what we're doing here today, you're the sheriff. You're responsible for your mistakes, and you're responsible for the assets that you accumulate. Learn what you're doing.
So Marshall Fogel is clearly stating here that high quality and high grade condition is the foundation of his collection. It's not just about obtaining a card, but it's obtaining a card in a really high quality grade. A great example of the card. And we know Mr. Mint has the nickname Mr. Mint, but when he got into collecting and he got into the hobby back in the 1970s, as we just heard him say just a second ago at the beginning of the video, when he talked about how he got into collecting, he said, yeah, I went to the show, cards were in no protection. There were no cases, there was no holders, it was just cards sitting out on a table. And so that was the theme. The theme was why there's no real need to protect these things. Cards, having the cards is cool, but the condition wasn't really that big of a deal, or was it? So when he's asked here in a second about condition and being condition sensitive, I think that this is an example where we could see how Mr. Mint was a little bit ahead of his time as far as his opinions in this regard.
Now, you talked about the name Mr. Mint. So early on, you recognized that getting cards that were in good shape was going to be important down the road. Because there's actually a lot of stuff out there. It's just not all in...
Oh, it's like, real estate's location, location, location.
Sure.
And our business is condition, condition, condition. I came from a coin background, so I know, I knew coins, and uncirculated coins are worth a lot of money, and
Sure.
the circulated coins are worth much less. So I went for the uncirculated cards. And they were much easier, obviously, to obtain, in the 70s and 80s and early 90s than now.
We try to stress to a lot of the younger collectors, even with the new stuff. Now, I know you do, like, 1869 to 1969.
That's very observant.
But when it's quite obvious. But, we've got some, younger collectors like Ty that's here tonight. He's 10 years old. We try to tell him, hey, you get a good card out of a pack, put it in the plastic and in the sleeve right away so it stays good. You drop it and you ding a corner. You just took a card that might have been a $100 card, and that's worthless.
Well, it's not worthless. But
Well,
it's
you
worth
know what I mean.
Much
less.
I really like what he said there at the end. He said, no, it's not worthless. Even in low grade, the cards are not worthless. They're just not worth as much. I thought that was a good catch, and that was interesting. He was like, no. Don't call a card worthless. Now, Marshall Fogel, in a separate interview, went on to talk a little bit more about condition and why it's important to him. So let's check out what he has to say in this one.
Yeah, I looked it up. These trophies cost $5 back in the day, and that was a lot of money. So to find them in good condition, I have seen trophies where the guys that own it would put their own name on it. I mean, it'd ruin it, right? So it's very difficult to find them where the base isn't broken or so on. But I always try to collect two ways: commercially and aesthetically. So, yeah, there are things worth a lot of money that look like a truck ran over them because they may have historic value. But I always collected for condition and aesthetic values. And as you go through some of the other pieces that you and Joe selected today, I think you'll get the understanding that how important condition is. And that's the way you'll never see anything in my collection that looks bad, but it could be valuable. Some people don't care, and I respect that. But I care about condition.
Mm-hmm. Eye appeal makes a big difference to you.
Exactly. You said it better than I did.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
So again, we've got these two legendary guys in the hobby. You got Mr. Mint, you got Marshall Fogel. One is primarily a dealer, but also a collector. And the other one is pretty much exclusively a collector. And in both cases, they point to high grade condition. High quality condition stuff is what they have targeted. I find that interesting. It doesn't mean it's the right answer. It doesn't mean it's the only answer. But two guys that seem to kind of be ahead of the curve, both stress heavily condition. Now, the other part of it is what to collect, what to target. What are the things to go after besides just high grade stuff? And Marshall Fogel continues to seem to be a little bit ahead of the curve, a little bit ahead of the trend on what he targets for his collection. So let's take a look at what he has to say here when talking about how to buy things on a budget, but how to buy things that are going to have future value. Let's take a look here.
But it's like all my collectibles. One of the lessons that you can still learn is be there before anybody discovers it.
Sure.
So, like me collecting photographs, nobody wanted them. Collecting pinbacks, nobody wanted them. Collecting baseball gloves. And as the market matured, it became to a point where if I was collecting today, you'd have to have really deep pockets. So when people say, oh, I had all this money, well, you got to remember, I'm talking 30 years ago.
Right.
And even when the start of the internet came about, it still was reasonable. Now, I would say since, I don't know, 2015 to today, the curve of value wasn't a curve anymore. It went straight in the air.
Hockey stick growth, yeah.
Yeah, yes, exactly. That doesn't mean that you can't still collect as a hobbyist because there's so much volume. And that's what makes it great. There's a lot of it. Especially today, the players like Mike Trout, he must have like Derek Jeter. There's tons of their bats out there, whether it's a profit motive or not, or whether they felt it's nice that people could have their bats, but they're still expensive.
So really he's saying lead the crowd, don't follow the crowd. Find something that interests you. Find something that hasn't gotten expensive yet, but might have the potential of it. And by having the potential of it, you want to buy high-grade copies of it, and you want to buy things that aren't just all over the place. Now, Mr. Mint also touches on this in the main interview that we're talking about with Mr. Mint and sharing with Mr. Mint that I pulled out some pieces of. And the thing he has to say here is very similar about how a lot of collectors are going after the same old stuff that everyone else is collecting. But just why? Why is it that everybody goes after the same thing? Why collect a ton of the stuff that everybody has instead of also looking at some of the stuff that's a little bit rarer? And he brings up this point, and again, I don't think we can just gloss over it. Let's check it out.
In the car, I have a gentleman's collection I'm going to buy Wednesday in Detroit. He wants $286,000 for the collection. And we just spoke on the way when I drove down here. We spoke about how come he never went in for the oddball stuff. Because, that's much harder to find. All the Topps insert stuff, the 59 Fleer, the 63 Fleer with the checklist.
Right.
They weren't even made 1 year. Those are really neat, but he has 556 sets, 857 sets. I mean, it's meat and potatoes is what I'm going to buy from him, but there's no exciting stuff. You know what I mean, Doc? By exciting stuff?
Yeah, I know.
Red Heart dog food.
Right.
Those are
the oddball stuff.
Yeah, the oddball stuff. You can go through the standard catalog or the Beckett Guide and find 500 issues that maybe I've had once or twice in 31 years of doing business. I mean, these are fine, and these are your Chevy and Fords, but you get some of those old Wilson Wieners. 20 cards. Ted Williams with that big swing with that ball and that package of hot dogs, flying away.
Yeah.
Those are great cards.
Yeah.
Great cards.
So Mr. Mint, even though he's out there buying these collections, we know of his 52. We'll hear about him telling his story of his high number case of 52 Topps that he bought at the end of the video. If you haven't heard this yet, you've got to stick around to the end and hear him tell this story. But he's even saying, I'm buying these collections of the 56s and the 57s and the 63. But why aren't people going after the rarer stuff? Why aren't people going after some of these regional cards? He raises the question. So then what ends up coming up, and I know that in the Mr. Mint interview, there's a couple of, they're kind of dressed up and being goofy, but they're both actually knowledgeable collectors, and they ask some great questions. And one of the things that comes up is, what about kids? Shouldn't kids be buying vintage cards instead of buying, the new stuff. It's the same stuff we talk about all the time today. Now, keep in mind, this Mr. Mint interview was recorded in 2006. Okay, so it's over 15 years ago, closing in on 20 years ago that this interview took place. And even then, they were talking about, why are kids buying the new stuff and opening the new packs instead of buying the vintage stuff? Because the vintage stuff is where the real value is. So that's the question that comes up. And check out how Mr. Mint responds.
You could buy for $50 to $75 a card in VGX of a Hall of Famer from 1909.
Right.
I think that you could buy a common for $15 or $10.
Right.
I think that's a great deal. The only problem is, there's only one problem with that, with your theory, Doc. And that theory is, a kid can bust a box of cards, and he can go home and watch a game. And those players that he just busted are in that box. And that's interesting.
Well, I understand that.
Does he know? Does he know who three-fingered Mordecai Brown is?
No,
does he care?
But it's a good way to learn the history of the game.
It's funny. I watch these YouTube videos. I watch these content creators. I read comments. I make comments. I respond to comments. And these are the same questions that we're asking now that these guys were talking about almost 20 years ago. This is not new stuff. We are not talking about, oh man, I think vintage cards are going to go down in value someday because young kids don't care about vintage players anymore. That's not a new idea. They've been talking about this for 20 years. When I was a kid, they were talking about the same thing. When I was going to card shows at 9, 10, 11, 12, the years I was seeing Mr. Mint, I saw Mr. Mint several years in a row at the big San Francisco card shows, at the Fashion Center in San Francisco, at the Moscone Center at San Francisco, and I would see him year after year. And when I would see him, these were the same questions that were coming up. The same questions. I would go admire the vintage cards. I would go look at the T206s and the T205s and the T207s and the caramel cards and the other tobacco cards and the Allen and Ginter cards. I would check them all out, and I thought they were awesome, but I couldn't afford them. So I'd go over to my quarter box and I'd buy a few Roger Clemens cards. But I still love those vintage cards. This is not a new topic. We've been talking about this for a while. So the same basic question is brought up to Marshall Fogel. And Geoff Wilson's like, hey, you've got all this money tied up in vintage stuff. Are you at all concerned that this stuff might go down in value because kids don't really care about that stuff anymore? Let's see what Marshall Fogel has to say.
Do you have any concern that with the demographics of the country shifting, with the attention span of the young generations becoming shorter, you see the numbers in terms of what sports people are watching, and you see over the last 20 years you've seen football rise, you've seen recently soccer have an incredible surge in popularity in the country. Basketball's remained popular, but you've seen baseball fall. You've seen ratings for baseball fall. There's not as many fans today. They're having a more difficult time getting the younger generation into the game. And I'm curious, as a collector of so much of baseball history, do you think that in the long term could have an impact over what people are collecting or wanting to collect and pay attention to?
I think there's some complexity to your question, and I think what you're asking me is the game of baseball such that because the attendance is not as rampant as other sports, it's a slower game. Is it going to affect the vintage card market? Maybe is more in line with what you're trying to find out from me. I'm not concerned about it at all. I think what's happening, sports in general is becoming an international sport. Whether it's baseball, football in London, soccer's becoming much more attentive in here. Hockey, of course, Colorado Avalanche won the hockey Stanley Cup. all that's great. But nobody remembers Lenny Dawson, Darryl LaMonica, Jim Otto, they don't, Bob Cousy, Havlicek, Bob Pettit, but they remember Ruth, Cobb, Wagner, Garrett, DiMaggio, Colfax, Greenberg, the Cobb, as I said,
Mays, Mantle.
I mean, the list goes on.
Hank Aaron.
Why is that? Why do we remember people that have been gone for over 50 to 100 years?
In many cases, I mean, I never saw any of those guys play, but of course I know their names, they're legendary, and I know stories, the stories are legendary, right?
I think it's because, first of all, baseball has statistics that no other sport has.
It's true.
There's a whole generation of people that love just the statistics of the sport. I just don't think that we're going to see the popularity of any sport really go down because it's the special golden part of baseball. The way I see it now is, I remember watching movies where Joe DiMaggio said, "Thank God I'm a Yankee." Or Mickey Mantle, when I spoke to him when we had drinks together in Atlantic City, he said, if I would have been traded, because they were thinking of trading him at one time, probably not thinking too long about it, he would have quit. And I just feel that the singular hero will survive.
Yeah.
So Marshall Fogel, he basically said, no, I'm not worried at all. Because baseball history is part of American history. And baseball players, it's different. And I've come out and said a few times that I think vintage football cards have a lot of upside. I still think that. I do. And I've had people disagree with me. And I've had people that disagree with me even say some of the exact same things that Marshall Fogel just said. And I'll be honest, I might be wrong. I might be wrong, absolutely. Every time I share an opinion, I might be wrong. I'm by no means suggesting that I'm always going to be right. That's not possible. But Marshall Fogel says, no, I'm not worried at all. So let's cut back over to Mr. Mint talking about this same topic again later in the interview. It kind of comes back up. And when Mr. Mint is talking about it again, he starts talking about, these kids want to open a box because those are the people that they like. But what they could be buying is some of these other all-time greats. And then he starts going through some of the prices. Now, again, this is 2006. Not that long ago. The junk wax era, when a lot of us jumped in the middle to late 80s and early 90s. This is a decade, sometimes 15 years after that. And check out what some of the prices are that he's talking about on when these kids could be buying new stuff or vintage stuff, what the prices were of the vintage stuff. Mind blown image now. Check this out.
So when you talk about the kids opening the cards today, you're right. They want to see the players that are playing. But as far as the kids that really want to collect vintage stuff, there's still a lot of it out there to find. You can buy it reasonably. Hey, you said $75 for a Hall of Famer in good condition. You can buy a box of the new stuff for $75. I understand. But, it's a good way for them to get a collection started. And then as they get older, maybe they want to hand that collection down to their son.
Look, Cy Young. I don't need to direct back, but Cy Young. Nowadays, pitchers, great pitchers, crawl to 300 wins. Cy Young had over 500. Yeah. You can buy his card for $50.
I know.
A Cy Young. Yeah. You could buy Christy Mathewson, Walter Johnson. Yeah. One of the greatest pitchers of all time. He's 2,000 strikeouts ahead of every pitcher who ever lived. Yeah. And his card is, not a mint card, but you can get a nice card for $75 to $100. And I think that's a bargain.
I think so too, yeah. And again, it's good when kids can learn the history of the game. There's a lot more available to the kids today than when we were younger because of the media and you know, you got 600 channels on TV to flick through, and you've got stuff like on the Yes Network with the Yankeeography, and they go through the history of the player, and you find a lot of, you know, Thurman Munson. I did not know until that interview a year or two ago that he passed away in the plane. I thought he died from the plane crash, and he actually was stuck in there, and the other two guys on the plane couldn't get him out in time, and he said, "Go, get out." And you know, I didn't know that without, you know, watching on.
Good.
Yeah, so you know, a lot of times, you know, there's a lot more information out there for the kids today, and you know, it brings them closer to the older players that, you know, they only have heard about and have never seen.
Pretty interesting, right? Wish we had a time machine. But again, this is the same conversation where minutes before they were talking about, do you think that, you know, vintage cards will continue to have value because all the kids seem to be interested in the new stuff? And then a few minutes later, they start talking about the prices of the vintage stuff. Don't you wish you could get back in on those prices to what that vintage stuff was going for? So even 15, 20 years ago when they were talking about this and sharing these same concerns, the prices have skyrocketed on vintage since then. And it's not just because of the COVID boom. It's much bigger than that. Same exact topics, same exact concerns, and vintage has gone nuts since that point. So one thing that I've always been curious about is, what do some of these guys think about grading, authentication, PSA, SGC? What do they think about those? Well, remember, it was the mid to late 90s when the grading companies really got involved. And SGC and PSA were two of the very first in. And when Mr. Mint is asked about grading, I find it interesting what he has to say. Again, remember, this is over 15 years ago, not quite 20 years ago, when he's asked about grading. Check it out.
Do you prefer PSA?
I prefer PSA. I like SGC. Beckett, I'm a huge advertiser.
I know you are.
But
You're always in Beckett Magazine a lot?
yeah, I'm on the inside cover there of every issue. But I think, honestly, Honest Al, remember?
Honest Al.
Mr. Pirate? That I think cards are worth more if they're in the proper holders.
Yeah.
Like, a PSA card is always good. An SGC card, I think the older cards, like if you get a 96 or a 98, they use a different grading system. Mm-hmm. I think they sell better in the vintage cards.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just a feel.
They look good in the holder, too.
What about GAI?
GI I like too. As a matter of fact, I don't know if people out there in viewing land know this, but Mike Baker, who's the president of GAI, used to be the president of PSA. Mm-hmm. He's the original grader of PSA, right. And he's a good friend and he's a nice guy.
So even then, Mr. Mint is talking about grading companies. And I thought it was interesting he didn't take a strong stand for one of them. He just kind of said, no, you know, they're all okay, and, you know, I have a card. He said earlier that he had a card in PSA, and then he's saying, yeah, if it's an older card, it looks really good in SGC, and, you know, they all have some benefits to them. I found that very interesting. Now, again, this is 15 years ago, and these are the same topics that we're talking about now. Now, if you've not yet heard Mr. Mint talk about and tell the story about, there's a lot of videos of him out there telling this story. But I'm not going to interrupt this one. I'm going to simply let it roll and let you hear him tell the story of the massive 1952 Topps high number series case that he purchased. Oh my goodness. Listen from Mr. Mint himself.
Well, the week before he called me and told me that his father worked for a company named Graco, which made kids products, a bat and a ball, a glove, and in a packaged product.
Back in the
In the 50s.
50s?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this company apparently bought this case from Topps, and on the advertising of the glove and the ball and all the boxes they had, there was 8 different products. Hey kids, with every Graco product, get 3 Topps shiny baseball cards.
Oh, cool.
Because Topps was the first company to put the coating on the cards to make them shiny. And he called me and told me that he had 1 to 3 of every card from 1952. And I said, 1 to 3? I started adding it up. I says, man, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So he said, well, how much would you pay me? And I gave him a percentage, price.
Right.
That was on a Monday. He called me back on Tuesday. He said he had 7 to 10 of every card.
Wow.
I says, this has to be a scam. I mean, I've never seen, 1/10 of that. And I had been in business already for 10 years.
Right.
So I hired a policeman from my town. And he went up with me on the Saturday. But Friday night, the guy calls me.
Now, how did he know to call you to begin with?
Advertisements.
Okay.
Advertisements.
So advertising pays.
Advertising, as an old friend told me, advertising doesn't cost. It pays.
Right.
Friday night, the man calls me and tells me he has 30 to 50 of every card.
Oh, so now you're really...
I said, this is nuts. Yeah. So I went over to a friend's house, and I borrowed some more cash. I went up there with $150,000 in my pocket. Cash.
No playing games.
No Bank America card, no MasterCard. Walked into the guy's house.
Cash. Got all. You had it. The cabbage, the green stuff.
Green. Kind you like.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
baby. That's it.
Went up there.
I collect dead presidents. Even the guys that weren't presidents, like Franklin and them, I collect them too.
I go up there, and
what's so funny?
He lives in it. It's funny to be loose and
Hey, he's calling me loose. That's the biggest compliment I ever had. I used to date a girl that was a little... Go ahead. So
okay, so I go up there. It's a house.
You got 150
built
G's in your pocket.
The house is built in 1870, maybe.
Oh.
And he walks in. We walk in the dining room, and the dining room, the floor was just one huge floor with little pieces of wood all made together in a sunburst, and the whole side of the room was leaded stained glass with paneling.
Wow.
And I'll never forget this as long as I live. He has these low-cut jeans on, and he opens up these doors and bends over.
Is he like a farmer in this guy, or?
Yeah. Right. And he has a plumber's crack going on.
Right.
And he pulls this tray, a silver tray.
Silver platter.
A platter.
Mod on.
And he puts it in front of me. And I remember having to go lift up to see the top. They were face down.
You got to be kidding me.
And I looked like this to see the top of what number he had on the top of the stack. And it happened to be 305, George Metkovich.
Oh.
So I took 305 and 306 and 309. I got down to 311, Mickey.
Yeah.
I wound up with 75 of those babies.
Wow.
And my hands were shaking.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like going on a pirate ship and discovering, boxes of gold.
Yeah.
So,
like the balloons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I took the cards outside. I sniffed them.
Yeah. Smell the gum?
I just was so unsure of spending all that money. And that's all the money plus borrowed money.
You didn't want to get any fugazis.
I did, right.
Bogus.
I didn't know if they were real or not.
Yeah.
Then he says, he says, are you doubting the authenticity of these? Oh, I says, 75 of every card from 1952. I mean, they're beautiful, right out of packs. He says, well, the rest of the case is in the kitchen. I said, no. You have more of these? He's the non-mint ones. They're in the kitchen. I go in the kitchen, and there's the original case. Couldn't believe it.
Is that right?
I could hardly even compose myself.
Now those 52 cards, they were never wax packed. They were individually sold to Graco from Topps.
I still own the case, and I think what happened is the case says 24 boxes, 6 cards. Now, 24 boxes to me could either be wax, could be solo, right? And 6 cards, and it says 5 cents.
Right.
So that means that there were nickel packs of something.
Right.
With 6 cards in a pack. When I got the case configured to be 12,000 cards.
Wow.
Or thereabouts. I only got 5,500 because actually half that case. But nothing in the face of the earth, nothing ever made is worth more per card than that case of cards.
Sure.
Not a stock, not a bond, not a house, not a car, nothing.
All things being relative.
Right. That case cost the wholesaler approximately $12.60. And today,
if you go back in time,
18 million that case is worth.
$18 million.
It's 12 inches. It's 12 inches.
Are you kids listening? Get up in the attic, get under your grandparents' bed, look around. There's got to be something laying around.
12 inches long, 8 inches wide, 6 inches deep. $18 million. Name me one thing that cost $12 in 1952 that's worth $18 million today. If you can't. Name me something that's less than a penny, because 6 cards for a penny. I mean, six cards for a nickel.
That's amazing.
Name me something that was less than a penny in 1952. And like a mantle, I mean, if you had a mint mantle nowadays, you could get 50 to 100,000 for a penny.
What an incredible story. Now, I've heard that story a few times. I've watched him tell it in a couple of different instances. There are several YouTube videos of him telling the story. Could you imagine being in that room when seeing all of that? And when he did this, keep in mind, this is not at today's values. You even heard him talk about some of the values of some of these cards and what they were at 2006. But imagine that happening now. My goodness, what an unbelievable find, purchase. Incredible story. At the end of the day, the point of this video is, I think that there are times that it's best to reach out and ask an expert. Ask someone who's been there. When you go to a card show and you find that vintage dealer who's a nice guy and wanting to talk, pick his brain. Ask him questions. See what his opinion is on things. Because these guys have knowledge, they have experience. And I don't think that all of us talking to each other is always the best place to find the information. It's not always the best place to get the best insight. Sometimes the best insight is going to the legendary collectors and dealers and seeing what they have to say. The people who are able to envision where the hobby could go well before the hobby got there. If you look at Marshall Fogel's track record, some of the things that he bought before they skyrocketed in price, he seems to be batting a pretty high percentage with his predictions. It's always interesting to see a variety of opinions, and it's especially, in my opinion, important and interesting to hear the opinions of some of the legendary people from the hobby.